So first and foremost, thank you all for coming. Um, Thank you to Mike and MCCTC for hosting us. Thank you to our speakers, who I will introduce shortly, for making it out here. If it wasn't for them, this event wouldn't be here. So this is Nick, and I'm Joe. We kind of co-organize Code Youngstown. I recognize many people here, but if you haven't been to one of our events before, thank you so much for joining. Kind of our format is we try to have an event every other month. Every 6 months we have like a social, and every month or every event in between those, we try to have some kind of tech talk like this. Excuse me. This is actually our first event at MCCTC, so I'm very excited that we were finally able to make this happen, because we've been talking about it for years. So that's exciting. The main thing we try to do here at Code Youngstown is just bring together software engineers and people who want to be software engineers and software hobbyists to kind of bounce off of each other, help make connections for work, help people kind of get used to talking about code, and introduce people to other people who share similar interests. If you like what we're doing here, if you're not in our Slack group, go to codeyoungstown.com and join Slack. We have over 300 people now in Slack, so it's really exciting. That is a lot of people for the Youngstown area to be in one Slack group, so that's very exciting to us. Is there anything I'm missing, Nick?
Let me think. Yeah, I can't think of anything right now. We did t-shirts 10 years ago. We got a request for new t-shirts though. Over there's a whole bunch of swag. There's MCCTC bags, stickers, Code Youngstown stickers from our speakers tonight. Grab all that stuff, it's free. If you're interested in a t-shirt, let me know. We are charging for those. And apparently our last one's held up for like 10 years because people said that they wanted new ones because the giant logo was still intact 10 years later, which is awesome. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Otherwise, grab a bunch of swag over there. Like Joe said, definitely join us in Slack. Our goal is to basically make connections in software locally in Youngstown and make sure that you can find a gig, even if it's a remote gig outside of Youngstown, but still be able to stay in this area, make connections, find your next gig, let people know that you're at a place that's hiring. We love to get that junior pipeline going for people that are just trying to get into software and maybe don't even know where to begin. We had a junior night a couple months ago, and we're just basically trying to get that mentorship going so people can get that first junior gig on their resume. So, I mean, really, if we get those sort of connections made and people get hired and people get educated and meet other people, that's really our goal, and we feel like we've, did what we're trying to do here. So definitely find us on Slack, codeyoungstown.com, events on Meetup for this kind of stuff, our socials. Our next thing's probably going to be lightning talks. We're still trying to figure out a venue. We don't have a date yet, but it's going to be, what month is it now? September something is going to be lightning talks. If you're interested in giving any kind of talk with us, we've been trying to put on a game dev talk for a couple of years now, so I'm super excited that we were able to actually round up multiple speakers to give this sort of thing, especially here where maybe a lot of students coming out of here are into games, and that's their sort of segue into software development, which is awesome. Anything that gets people into software and gets people employed is awesome to us. So, and I don't know a damn thing about video games, so I'm really interested to hear about security and how that stuff's made. So if you're interested in giving any kind of speech, if you're interested in speaking about anything at one of our events, please let us know. As far as planning goes, Joe and I do most of it, but if you're interested in maybe participating in Code Youngstown planning, please let us know. We would love to let people take the reins, make their own events, give suggestions on those kind of things. We're definitely into all that. We just want to build a community around this stuff. What else do we have? Yeah, keep an eye out for lightning talks for that to be posted, and let us know if you want to give a lightning talk, like a 6-minute talk on anything technology related. We've had talks on software development. We've had talks on hacking, programming, security, design systems, and actual like multimedia design. We've had project management talks, all kinds of stuff. Anything that's in the software world, we're really interested in hearing that kind of stuff. So let's, I guess, introduce our speakers. Thank you so much for them.
Cool. I guess I'm introducing the speakers. So we have we have two speakers, or three speakers, two talks today. We have first Clint Sereday, who is the co-founder and CEO of Byfron Technologies, doing a talk on cheats, hacks, and exploits. And then after that, we have Patrick and Michael, who are the CEO and CTO of RustBit Studio, doing a talk entitled, Do You Want to Build a Game? So without further ado, Clint, give it up for Clint. And I'll just hand this off.
Cool. All right. I'll be fine. I'm good. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Well, thanks for coming to the talk today, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I decided this talk is going to be just on kind of how I got hit in the face a bunch of times and learned a bunch of stuff. Hopefully you can apply this or some of the lessons that I've learned in my experience of fighting cheaters and hackers on live service video games, and maybe to your own software and how you do your development. So without further ado, let's get started. So a little bit more about myself. So I grew up in West Middlesex, which is about 30 minutes or so from here. I would consider myself a gamer first before anything else. I've loved games since I played the Nintendo. I actually broke my arm on the playground when I was in kindergarten. Got put in the hospital, and they wheeled in a Nintendo, and that was my life. Before Byfron, I used to work at Riot Games, where I kind of led the anti-cheat program there for about 8 years, built out a great team of individuals, worked on League of Legends, Valorant. Our main product that we launched in 2020, wow, it's crazy that it's 2022, was Vanguard, which was kind of our kernel anti-cheat detection system that we used. So the agenda for today. So I'm going to talk a little about why security matters. Then we're going to discuss a little bit about game security strategy. And then I'm going to tell you guys some stories about bots, boosted monkeys, and game hacking. Just some stories about some stuff that I've dealt with. Cool. But before I go into gameplay security, which is really what my focus has been on and where I've spent most of my time, live service games really have every problem. I've seen, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a group going around called LulzSec. They were attacking different game companies, doing DDoS attacks and things like that. They created a lot of problems for Riot. We had malware at times introduced into our own infrastructure that we were delivering to players, which was not a good experience. We've had infrastructure compromises when I was at Riot for people setting up Bitcoin miners. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So, live service video games have to deal with pretty much every security threat, and then on top of that, move the mic up, sorry. So live service video games have to deal with every threat, and then on top of that, they also have to somehow protect players from being attacked in game. One of the cool things just to mention here as well is player harm was also something that we experienced, where when someone would give either school shooting threat or suicide threat or things like that, we had a team that actually took care of that stuff as well, and we're actually able to help some young gamers out. So cool. All right. So why is security? Why is game security important? Well, it's a pretty big business, actually. Most game hacking businesses are in China, or a large majority of them, but they're all around the world in multiple different countries. For a lot of individuals, there's a lot of money to be made here, and it's a lot better. Some very, very brilliant engineers in these countries can make more hacking and selling hacks for video games than they can even software developing in their local markets. So there's a lot of motivation behind it. And, had I known, how much money was on the dark side, even when I got started in this, I, maybe chose the wrong side to be on, certainly. But it also matters for the product too, right? So, from a product perspective, you really have two types of game product here. You have red ocean and blue ocean. And blue ocean is a space where there's not a lot of competition, and you're really competing on novelty, right? Maybe Minecraft, Roblox, and Hytale are bad examples because that market's starting to get pretty full. But if you are a new idea or a new type of game, then the quality of your service doesn't matter quite as much. But as you start to go into competition with other people, so the product that I most recently worked on, which was Valorant, direct competitor to Counter-Strike and everyone else on this list, the quality of the service is what matters to retain players, to get people to try the game, things like that. So security actually plays a pretty big role here. But like I said, I'm a gamer first and foremost, and so the thing that's really my main motivator is competitive players and protecting kind of competitive integrity. Used to go to tournaments, old Street Fighter player. I love competitive games. And so this is really what's motivated me and my partners to start Byfron. Cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit about strategy. So this was actually strategy. So before I worked in games, I worked in the credit card processing field, and I built models, risk models for detecting fraud. And one of my first kind of Jedi masters, if you will, taught me the Sun Tzu Art of War quote, which is actually attributed to Sun Tzu, but after looking into it, it actually is just an old Chinese saying. And really, it's all about being able to understand your enemy. So the quote is, "Zhi Ji Zhi Bi Bai Zan Bu Dai." It's, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you do not need to fear 100 battles. And really, in any type of engagement where you're engaging with an active threat, you have to think about what their motivation is, why they're doing it, and understanding what their capabilities are. The better you're able to do that, the more successfully you will be able to protect your own product. It's really simple. I get memed on by all my team. I put this in every presentation I give. You know, my teams have always memed on me for this one, but I do believe in it deeply. All right, so understanding the enemy, right, or understanding the people that cheat. Really, there's a lot of reasons why players cheat. You know, some players want just to, you know, break the game, and that's their main motivator. Other people want to make money. And really, so these are kind of the four categories that we've kind of created and bucketed that people cheat in. So at the top of this pyramid is money. It's actually the smallest group of people, but they have the biggest impact on the rest of the game economy. And usually, most of your defensive measures, you can no longer affect them inside the game anymore because they really don't care. They're just making money off of your game to begin with. And then underneath that, you have the power. So these are people who cheat for power. They might be trolls. They just want to create a bad experience for other players. You know, they want to make their favorite streamer have a bad game, something like that. They also are the reverse engineers, and they might be individuals who are really into engineering, and attacking the game has become the game to them. So they're not always necessarily maliciously motivated. Then you have the glory player, right? These are players who want to win because status means something to them, or means a lot to them. If they think, they won't cheat if they think it's going to ruin their reputation or status, or they'll get caught. But if they think they can get away with it, they'll cheat all day, and I'll share a story about that. And then at the bottom of this, generally you have players who are cheating for content in some way. You know, whether it's piracy, whether it's, you know, running other hacks or things like that to gain access to content. You know, they just really love the game. These are players who really love the product and maybe can't afford it. Cool. So another really good strategy that we learned was perception and reality matter. So when in a live service game, when players experience cheating, so when they see other players cheating, they have a much higher percentage to cheat or to pick up cheating, right? So most cheat companies or most cheat organizations that make cheats, they advertise in-game, they price at the same price model as usually the games do. They try to hit a price point that they know, you know, the players can afford, that type of thing. So in 2016, we had a real big issue in Korea. So in Korea, esports is, you know, pretty much on another level. And we had really struggled to nail down a bunch of different cheating suites at the time. And so we've seen this shift in culture where players went from thinking cheats were something that we could catch to something that we couldn't catch, that Riot couldn't catch, and that you must cheat in order to compete. So players were like, well, if they can't catch me and everybody else is cheating, I guess I'm going to do it too. And this vicious cycle just started happening over and over where, you know, players would see people cheating, pick up cheats, get banned. Obviously, we were still able to do detections, things like that for most of them. And, you know, we were just ended up banning our own players. The other challenge is in Korea, they have a social security system because the government monitors player time. So when you get banned from the game, we also banned that pretty much that government ID, so they could no longer play. So we had we allowed for multiple IDs on a single government ID. So sometimes we would ban an account or an ID, and we'd be banning 3 players, maybe only one of who cheated. So just a really, really challenging time. And so through this, what we really learned was the perception war is just as important as the reality of how many cheats you're detecting and kind of banning and how well you're protecting your game. Cool. Game security is no different than any other type of security. You want to think about it in layers. So these are kind of the layers that we think about: prevention, detection, deterrence. So how much can you prevent cheating from your game being exposed to it? Detection being like, okay, if somebody is participating in this behavior that you cannot prevent, can you detect it? Can you tell how bad of an issue it is? And that kind of goes back to the point of managing your perception. And then deterrence is, how do I set up policies and measures and technology to keep players from doing this again? So an example of that would be like your banning policy. If you're unfortunate enough to have to go after some of these cheating groups legally, you would do things like that. And the further through these layers you get, obviously, the less effective it is and the more damage potentially can happen. Cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the different types of cheats I've seen. So the bot war. So I've heard it said that like most of the internet is automation at this point, and probably 30% of the automation to 40% is some type of malicious automation, whether it's like, you know, random political Twitter bots or Facebook bots or this type of stuff. And games are really no different. So in League of Legends, the primary motivator for bots was creating accounts. So let's say, you know, you wanted to play with your friend and they were playing on a server that you weren't on. Well, I'll just go buy an account to play ranked, because we had a gate. We gated players because we didn't want players to join the ranked experience until they played a certain amount of games. So that gating ended up creating a motivation for players to want accounts. There was also, you know, we had a team that was responsible for banning players for toxicity, bad behavior, things like that. So that's also a market that was created for accounts. So, you know, our good intentions also created a market for these things to be sold. So yeah, account sales were really big. But this is pretty common across the industry, as far as like, you know, whether it's you have MMOs or virtual worlds like World of Warcraft gold selling, things like that. Anywhere that there can be money generated by automation, there's going to be a company out there and individuals out there that are going to try to do it. And even if you can drive that to a really low amount of money that they make off of it, I mean, that's to get ahead of what I'm going to tell you about. That's basically how you have to attack this problem, but it's still very, very hard. I remember when I first took this on, I was like, oh, bots, yeah, no problem, we'll take care of this. You know, oh, look how easy they'll be to detect. They're not, you know, most of our bots at the time were coming from China. It's like, oh, we can look at the IPs. Yeah, we can block these. We can ban these. This is going to be, you know, no problem. It was not. It was very, very difficult, and it's still a major issue today. So botting methods. So commonly, really, virtual machines are used a lot, especially if you're running, you know, a PC game, right? So example here, you see a bunch of, I think this is Lost Ark. So these are just virtual machines that are running the game, collecting content, probably for resale. The top right on your side here is a PS3 farm, I believe, for FIFA. So, you know, it's generating content that way, and then obviously you have the mobile phone farms. So this is how the botting methods are used or done. And what I learned, the main way to address this is really containment is the key to victory. I remember when we were first dealing with the problem, I talked to one of my colleagues at Blizzard at the time, and he was like, what we did was we drove all the gold sellers to one server, and that gave us a much better ability to control the environment, control the selling, and that kind of stuff. So we tried many different tactics here, and the challenge is that it's kind of whack-a-mole. The bots, because they're botting your service, they also have an incredible ability to learn what works and what doesn't work. You know, because they're spinning services up and down, they can find out, oh, you're banning more for this, or you're doing more for that. So that was their advantage, but we turned it into their weakness by funneling them into game modes that we knew players were going to be less affected by. So our main goal, first off, was like, how do we get these bots out of game and out of the experience of new players? So just to share some statistics, if a new player experiences a bot, they were 30% less likely to continue playing the game. So it's a really shitty experience, and I've recorded we've monitored and looked at a bunch of games, and you know, sometimes players don't understand that they're playing with a bot, so they'll be yelling and they'll get really angry, or they'll think that like all these players are horrible or really bad, and they don't even understand that, you know, they're actually playing with something that's farming. So what we did was we used to have, or there was a game mode called Twisted Treeline. It was a 3v3 game mode, And we pushed them there. And we pushed them there because behind the scenes, League of Legends has an MMR system that rates players based on skill. And it matches players so that you're always playing someone within a similar skill range as you. By pushing them to 3v3s, we were able, they were very bad at 3v3. But that ended up being good because their MMR got so low that they wouldn't play the average player or a new player even. When we had bots in ARAM, so ARAM is like, it's pretty much, to explain League of Legends, it's a 5v5 game. It's just a single lane where everybody fights together. You could literally mash, and when we had bots in that game mode, they could actually play at slightly better than a new player was able to, because they at least knew, you could programmatically make the game a little bit more effective. So containment is the key. Cool. So just some tips on addressing botting. You gotta have realistic player expectations. When game developers create quests or loot or rewards, you gotta think about what is a real player actually gonna be experiencing on the other side of the screen, right? Are they, if you're requiring this player to put in 24 hours of grind time, that's not a very healthy or realistic experience for players to have. And what you're gonna do is just incentivize, automation. So don't do that. Limiting game instances per machine is like, that's how you attack them. Because really, people that are into botting, they're doing it for money. They're doing it to gain a profit in some way, in most cases. And so all you have to do is attack their value, right? So you can do things like, so when we first started, we had an issue where people were running headless clients, didn't have to run the client, could basically just send commands to the server, and it was very, very cheap for them to run millions and millions and millions of bots. We encrypted our network traffic. We created a unique network language that forced them to actually run the client. We made some client changes there, so they actually had to run it. That cut our bots like in half. So the more you can do, there's also, you could get, actually, we'll talk about later, but you can get technology so that, to break virtual machines or not like virtual machine environments, that kind of thing. And then lastly, like we talked about, contain the damage. Try to find a way to remove this automation from the player community. Cool. So next we're going to talk about boosted monkeys. So this is actually something that when I talk about cheating, a lot of people don't really understand how big of a market boosting is. But so what is boosting? So boosting really is a form of cheating where a higher skill player sells their time to someone else or a lower skill player for the purpose of increasing the account rank. I mean, it seems like, oh, well, how could that be a huge problem? But it ends up being a very big problem when you have a game that's trying to be competitive. We've had issues where someone will gain rank if you have a public leaderboard, advertise on that leaderboard their boosting services and generate money that way. And something players don't really like very much. So yeah, so this is what the 2020 rank distribution for League of Legends looks like. So within the game, there's a ranked mode. All players are ranked based on skill and how they perform in their games. And as you can see, the rankings go from iron to bronze to silver, gold, platinum, diamond, master, grandmaster, and challenger. And pretty much anything past plat 3 and up is under 5% of the population of players already. So there's a huge demand, maybe for clout reasons, maybe for one of the interesting things that we saw over the years was like as influencers and streaming took off and became more a predominant source and even a resource, people would buy boosting so that they could appear as a better player than they actually were, or would pay for boosting services and pretend to play the game type thing. So the main motivation is kind of on that side. Yeah, but the challenge here is that you have players who are incredibly skilled, but they might not be good enough to necessarily go pro. And they want to monetize their play in some way. These are players who might be playing 8 to 10 hours a day. And so, yeah, I might as well get paid for my time. So there's a wealth of players out there who are looking to, make money doing what they love. There's also a lot of challenges on the advertising side. So we had an issue in Brazil where, a boosting ring was running commercials on TV for, hey, get to the rank that you want to be, right? Like you got to get to the rank you want. The matchmaking system stinks. That really wasn't the case in most cases. And I also put this guy, Apto. He was the #1 player on the Korean leaderboards. And he was banned for 1,000 years because he got caught boosting. And they take, as we discussed, they take competitive gaming very, very seriously. But here's a player who was trying to monetize his play in some way. Really, really great player, and ended up falling. And I kind of look at this as a tragedy because he got caught during the game's rise, before esports and before the game had a really strong competitive ladder, when, had he not done it for a year or two, he might have been on an esports team and, who knows. But yeah, okay. So how do you fight boosting? So it's all about knowing your player. So there's really kind of two sides. It's data, right? It's about understanding the account and the account telemetry and account data. So where's that player playing from? What's the average times they're playing? And then it's looking at gameplay data. So, what characters do they like to play? How good are they when they play? That type of thing. Most boosting, they're unlike, some of the other forms of cheating that we'll talk about. There's no real hard detection metrics here. It's all behavioral. So you either have heuristics models or machine learning models to try to detect different types of boosting. Cool. All right. So addressing boosting. So content is king. One thing I didn't mention was, even though we had all these different ranks, right? The #1 rank that people boosted to was gold. Well, why would they boost to gold? Well, we gave a skin out when you reached gold. So most of the boosting was actually even motivated just from content, right? So because we decided to reward players when they got to a certain rank, we created a challenge or a problem in the game ecosystem. So it's just something you have to balance. Player and device information is super important, and make sure you support positive alternatives. So something that I've seen a lot of games doing now is like coaching services. Instead of boosting or playing on someone else's account, there's cool gameplay mechanics around like dual queuing or playing together, that kind of thing. All right, so we'll talk about probably what you guys were thinking, more along the lines of game hacking, right? So traditional hacking comes in a bunch of different flavors, but really it's just augmenting the application that's running on the computer, either internally or externally. Internally meaning editing the game in some way using game functions, or externally just taking control over Windows functions to accomplish things. So like in a shooter, it's very easy to make external cheats because really all you're doing is creating aimbots or wall hacks to figure out where the opponents are. In a game like League of Legends, which is a MOBA, there's a lot more that goes into that game, so the types of cheats there are more scripted. They call them scripts, but they're like gameplay automation where they hook game functions within the actual game to automate behavior. I threw the Among Us on here. I don't know if you guys have ever used Christware on Among Us, but it's a pretty awesome cheat. Pretty much can do anything, gives you full like admin access to the game. And that's just the level of the level of types of cheats that are kind of out there. Kind of what we're going to talk about. All right, so I wanted to show you one of my favorite cheats, but to do that I got to explain a little bit. So can I see how many people know what League of Legends is or have played it? Oh, okay, so yeah, cool. I guess I don't have to explain that much. So for the few of you who haven't played League of Legends, it's a team-based game. Really your objective is to kill the enemy base of the other team player, and you have a map to do so. You gain strength and power as you level up, and the map gets smaller, so the weaker team has a stronger defensive point. And that's kind of the balance of MOBA, and that's why you see this map everywhere in MOBA, to be honest. But there's a character in the game called Xerath, and this is a cool exploit because I'll show you the exploit, and then I'll kind of explain under the hood how it worked. But Xerath's a character who has a very long range. So in League of Legends, there's 4 abilities, QWER, and I believe it's his Q, is his longest range ability. And it kind of charges over time, and he has one of the longest ranges of any character in the game, and then it kind of fires off, and you can see it here. All right, so I'm going to see if I can play this. So what we're looking at here is someone who's running scripts. So the Xerath is walking to this one point on the map, which is close to his base. And notice it's nice and neatly pointed out by the script. So these circles that you're seeing are the overlay that's being drawn by the cheat that's being run. The game's starting up, and you have, the full gameplay map down here. I don't know, have any of you ever seen this exploit? Oh man, this is a cool one. So what Xerath is doing here is he's going to be queuing or attacking and doing damage to every character, every minion, and everything on the map all at the same time, every single time he casts his Q. So we'll let it, I'll speed it up here. So he's assisting everyone in each lane. He's farming gold. He's from each lane. He's killing minions in the jungle, and he's doing that all from the base. Cool. So basically, it gave the red box here kind of represents his hacked range, and the normal queue is like his circle down here, just to give you an idea for like scale. So two things needed to have happen here in order for this cheat to work. An exploit had to be found within the game. And so an exploit is something that taking advantage of a game system. It's really just a bug of some kind that, the game devs either didn't think of or didn't think that someone was going to take advantage of in that way. So in League of Legends, the hitboxes in the game are actually just XY axis. There's no Z axis. There's no up or down. It's really just a 2D map when it comes to hitboxes. Now the graphics, they have a Z axis to display them, but when characters jump or things like that, they actually just disappear. The hitbox moves flat, right? So on a flat plane. So what someone figured out was, well, the animation has a Z axis. So what happens if I basically invert that and go negative numbers on it? So pretty much shoot into the ground. So what ended up happening was it created an array error, and it ended up creating a hitbox that covered the whole map. So pretty cool exploit. So it was an exploit. You couldn't do this alone with just game within the game. You actually also had to edit the game as it was running. So we've seen these type of exploits a ton kind of through League's history. There was a really big one with Blade the Rune King, where when we didn't sanitize inputs from the server. So early on, all cooldowns in the game were not server controlled. They were on the player's machine. They were not on the player's machine, so players could pretty much send the server packets as much as they want so they could lower their cooldowns. So it was a similar thing in this case. Cool. All right. So why is stopping cheating so hard? Really, there's a lot of attack surface here. And the only way you can really fight software security or prevent it is in complexity or in control. So I won't go, I got 5 minutes, so I won't go into a bunch of these, but really the player has control over their hardware, the player has control over their OS and kernel, and even your game software because it's on their machine. As a game developer, you have access to your network and your server, and that's kind of how you should think about it. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to fight for control. Really quickly, just another quick story. We had a challenge with our anti-cheat detection system also had to be able to accurately, you want to be able to protect your detections as you send them down to players. So we thought we were so smart. We spent all this time working on our algorithm to protect the packet, which is a module that we send to players, scanning for a particular memory or looking for particular applications. Well, what one clever cheater did was he was like, screw that. I'm not going to spend all this time reverse engineering the packet structure. I'm just going to figure out when they're asking, and I'm going to send all that traffic to a clean box, and then I'm going to reroute it once it's done. So very quickly and easily, they were able to bypass us just by redirecting the detection to a clean machine. All right, so you have to fight for control, and you have to fight for complexity. So to go back to our layers, prevention, detection, deterrence, this is kind of like what I feel best practices. The first and best thing you could do is on the game design layer. So one of the popular exploits in Warcraft 3 and different RTS games was map hacks. League of Legends solved map hacks by keeping all that information on the server. So that information was never given to the client, so we never had to fight for control, and we never had to build complexity there. So if you can solve for game challenges in design, that is the absolute best place to do so. But there are other games like shooters that players require faster hit rates, things like that, where you will need to trust the client. That's when you want to look into software protections. That's kind of what Byfron does. Network protections. Then on the detection side, you have hard detections, memory signature scans, things like that. Behavioral risk detections, which is like machine learned detections. Risk monitoring, which is like scoring your players based on a risk that almost like a risk score, or how risky you think they are. And then deterrence, your action policy, how you ban players, what your messaging is to players is super important. I can't tell you how many times we shot ourselves in the foot over messaging the wrong thing and encouraging players to cheat when we shouldn't have. You really have to know your community. If you bring cheats up to a community that doesn't care or doesn't think about them often, you're going to create more cheats in your game than if you didn't say anything in the first place sometimes. But if you have a community that's very experiencing of cheats, hence the FPS community, you need to be open and honest and talk about it often. All right. Byfron, we make technology that we have 2 products right now, binary protection system. This is kind of my shill second. And then we have our own custom virtualization that we're working on. Pretty much what the system that we built is binary protection. So pretty much it gets between the game and the operating system and kind of monitors what's going on. And pretty much everything has to go through Hyperion in order to be trusted. Cool. But lastly, I just wanted to add a point that like anti-cheat is an arms race and it's an effort. And every change you make technologically, process-wise, anything, there's always a reaction on the other end, especially in games where you have an active threat. It's not like cheaters are criminals, right? There's no law against it. There's no problem there. And what I wanted to highlight was one time, so this is Matt. He was an analyst on the team. His technical skills, he was mostly proficient SQL and Python, but Matt had some of the biggest wins on the team because he was able to, find certain cheats or get access to certain things. And one time he found a developer for a cheat just because he was able to connect the waifu that this guy used online over multiple accounts. And he has a really brilliant mind for connecting, random pieces of data. And so in my experience, the effort is almost always defined by the team of people you have. Okay, so addressing hacking, prevention should be your goal. Again, if you can do it on the design side, it's best. If you can't, try to prevent as much as you can. Lean on your detections, things like that. You're fighting a war of control and complexity, and you have to balance those two. There are product needs that you need to take into consideration, and team over tech. Cool. If anyone has questions or wants to get deeper, I'll be around all night. So.
Hi, guys. So, I heard you want to build a game. Is that correct? Yeah? All right, well, shall we go ahead and get started, Michael?
We shall.
All right, well then. So, hi, my name's Patrick. If you want to hit the... So, hi, my name's Patrick. I am the CEO of RustBit. We are a small company based out in Akron, Ohio. We're building really, really cool games.
And I'm Michael. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and lead developer at RustBit. So I write a lot of C++.
Probably too much C++, I'm not sure. But anyway, so we've been doing this now for about three or 4 years-ish. And we make cool games. That sounds like a good idea. We're also a couple. Surprise. There we are. I'm wearing the same shirt. Woo. And like I mentioned, we've been at this for about 3 years. We've started some companies. We started a company in the past called Strife AI. It was a machine learning video game startup company. We were trying to make machine learning as like kind of a part of a video game thing, and then later on we moved on to RustBit. So we ended up ending that one. So anyway, So we've also done a couple games too. In the past, we did a game called Human Like with that Strife AI startup. It was a kind of platformer runner game where the robot was basically chasing you, trying to kill you, and would learn from your actions as you played the game. It would like kind of learn how you played and everything. And our current game now is The Grip of Madness. It is a cooperative first-person shooter with a hidden betrayal mechanic. Basically, everyone starts by working together, trying to fight off monsters and seal off eldritch horrors and whatnot, and save the world. But there's one person that becomes possessed and turns against the rest of the team, and their goal becomes to subvert that ritual and to end the world and all that exciting stuff. Wahaha. So there's, kind of a thing known as making a game is hard. It's not easy. So making a successful game is even harder. There's a lot of pieces that go into it, not just art and programming. There's also things such as like the business model, the visual effects, music, sound. The list can go on and on and on forever. And security, not to mention. So here are some of the lessons that we have learned so you don't have to. And so I'll go ahead and just start off this one. I'm kind of the business guy in our company, so I'll just start with a few ones here. I'd recommend getting a good team. You can only go so far with one person on your team as a solo dev, so usually getting additional people is great. Having a hacker, having a hustler, having a game designer, and an artist. That's kind of our team there. So there's me, and then Lexia is our artist. Michael is our developer, obviously, and then Ben at the very far end there with the funny hat is our game designer. And so we basically all kind of work together. We bring our own special, unique talents to the table, but we also collaborate a lot with each other. So we're very involved in that creative process. Another piece that I would give is probably look at the market. See what players are trying to play. It's great to make a passion project of your own, of a game that you really, really like. But if you want to get it like as a successful game, then being able to basically build the game that other players want to play is also really helpful as well. And just to kind of give you a kind of a sneak peek at our pitch deck actually kind of offers a bit of our market analysis when we built the game. We were initially building The Grip of Madness. So basically, we saw kind of an explosive trend in cooperative experiences. Players love to play with their friends, especially from the recent events with the pandemic. We also found that, with games such as like Among Us and Dread Hunger and those kinds of social deduction games, we found that there was a potential market there too and that there was kind of growing. And so we were like, hey, we think we can provide something here that's really unique. And also for those of you that end up going into wanting to go down like a publisher or an investor route, also having comparisons as well to your game. What's your game similar like? What's it, how does it differentiate between those games? And what is the estimated revenue amount? It can also give you kind of like ideas personally as like what does success look like for your game too. So yeah. And the next one here is no one cares about the tech. So what I mean by that is that if it's not involved in the gameplay or if it doesn't create that memorable experience, no one's going to really care. We actually learned our lesson with that with Human Like prior. We were talking a lot about, it uses machine learning and, for the first time and all sorts of stuff. And it ended up with a really moot response. So what we're trying to do instead is that we got a video here. Basically, it is a procedural generation technology that we've built into the Grip of Madness. And what that does, and what we're doing differently, is that we're kind of tying it into a roguelite system that we're building for the game, in which almost every aspect of the game is kind of randomized to guarantee a different experience every time. And so we try to tie it more into the gameplay as opposed to just saying, we have this really cool technology. I'd also say know your game as well. It's really important to kind of understand what the full cohesive vision of the game and what the full experience looks like, so that way you get everyone on board and you're all moving towards that cohesive vision, because otherwise you're just going to go around in circles. And to get around that, we use this fantastic piece of software called Notion to share our ideas, kind of collect our thoughts, and collaborate with each other and really understand like where the game is at and where we want to go with it too. I'd also say know the scope. This is really, really handy when you're talking to publishers. If you probably noticed, we're in the pitching stage as of late, so I'm showing bits of the pitch deck. It's really important to talk about with publishers, but also with players as well. Because players are always going to ask, if they're interested in your game, they're going to be like, when's this coming out? When's this going to be available on the Steam? When is this going to be available on the Epic Games Store? And so understanding what the scope is and what all the features are going to look like, this is from our pitch deck as well. So it gives kind of a general idea of what that will look like. And then I would also say getting feedback. Again, this is a game that you're playing for yourself. You're building for yourself. You're getting that level of satisfaction, but you're also building it for other people. So it's like really important to get other people's opinion on what it is and how can you improve it. And one of the things that we would do is that we would hold playtests at our office in Akron, or we would go to conventions. Conventions also help with like marketing as well, or we launched a demo on Steam that you can actually go and play right now. So we'd love to hear your feedback too if you have it. So it also helps with community building, because when your players get involved in your game and they get to see what it has to offer, they might offer some suggestions too about what you can do. And if you follow up with it, they'll feel really good about themselves too. They'll be like, hey, I took part in that. So run your marketing early. Like I said, we were going to conventions to get not only feedback, but also to drum up excitement about the Grip of Madness. And so I'd say, basically start off, figure out what your target demographic is, who you're looking for, and just really become a brand ambassador for your game. Start off with like content marketing, get some videos, GIFs, screenshots, whatever. And really just start getting out there, start posting it. We would make kind of like some videos. This is our convention reel. You probably saw it when you were coming in initially. But one of the other things that we did for our in-person audiences that came to our conventions, we went to a board gaming, video gaming convention down in Columbus called Origins, if any of you have heard of that before. Yeah. And one of the things that we did is that I painstakingly, through many sleepless nights, 3D printed a bunch of D&D minifigs of one of our monsters in the game. We actually had a stat block made of it too by our game designer, Ben. And we just handed them out in exchange for wish list. And I tell you, they were an absolute hit. And what people could do with those is that they could take them down to paint and paint them, and get them to post pictures of them and hashtag them Grip of Madness on Instagram. And now you've got kind of a marketing trend going on there. We also would hand out things like stickers and some cards as well, which I actually have some on that back table there for you guys today as well. Again, still more boring business stuff, but really important nonetheless. I'd also say get a reasonable budget together. This is really good life advice, personally. Follow your budget, but also I would say, as a business, it is also very, very important as well. Figuring out where are you spending your money. What scope does your game have? Because your scope might be limited by your budget. And so this is an early stage pro forma of what our early investment was going to look like. It's actually grown at this point. But basically, having to factor in things such as, salary, marketing efforts, getting computers for new employees, things of the like, and even probably stuff that you might not think about, like accounting or legal. Exciting, I know. And with that actually ends my segment, and it moves on to Michael. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to him.
Thank you. Hey, guys. So I want to talk to you about sort of the programming side of making a game. So I don't know if any of you guys have done like web development or anything like that. So game development is like an order of magnitude more complex in trying to manage all of the things that are going on. So one of the things you should be really comfortable with is just being able to write a lot of code. Our game demo is 25,000 lines of code that we wrote over the past year. And so when you think about like software, if you've got like n different things, maybe like web programming has like, I don't know, n log n interactions between the things, so not too many. But like a game is kind of closer to n squared. It's like you've got your player. They can interact with like almost any item in the game. So it's like you need to be comfortable like being able to write a lot of code. Patrick thought it would be cute to show my GitHub stats over the past year. Thanks, Patrick.
Anytime.
But beyond just being able to write code, I'd say that like actually writing the code is not the difficult part of doing game development. There's a lot more you need to know. So learning like vector math, learning like how matrix multiplication works, quaternions, learning how to do like client server type replications so that you can do a multiplayer game. These are all a lot of skills that are typically not directly in a normal programmer's toolkit. So the more you know about a wide range of topics, the better prepared you'll be to implement different sort of game mechanics. So part of the way you can get there is go out there and read code from other devs. So I don't know if you guys have ever played the original 1993 Doom or Quake or any of those games by id Software. I'm a huge fan of those games. All of those games are open source. So all of John Carmack's code is available to read. And I learned a huge amount from being able to just read what other people did. And so I'd say really take advantage of like code being open source. But don't reinvent the wheel. I think that's part of the reason it's like so important to really like understand what's out there. Don't go writing your own JSON parser or anything. Use a library or use a lot of the sort of built-in things that come with your game engine. And believe me, do not write your own game engine. We made this mistake. It is a huge nightmare. Anytime you want to do like anything, get ready for it to take like 10 times as long. Like the two major game engines right now, like Unreal and Unity, they both come with a lot of built-in features that are like really useful. I'm personally an Unreal guy because it comes with multiplayer support and other things like right out of the box. I'd say like the development environment in Unity is a lot more forgiving, but Unreal, yes, you have to use C++, but it just gives you so much more right out of the box. But while doing programming, let me tell you, assume nothing. Games are very complex systems. There are so many different types of interactions going on. When there are like bugs or performance problems or like network bandwidth problems, like you can't make assumptions about where it's going on. That's why it's so important to have like really good tooling. Typically your game engine comes with a lot of good tools. Like when I was doing the network programming on the Grip of Madness, we ran into a lot of like bandwidth problems. So you guys might know something about like UDP or TCP. Basically, you can only fit like under a kilobyte in a packet. And maybe, if you're lucky, you're getting like 20 to 30 packets a second to the client. There's really only so much data you can send, and you're trying to basically replicate the entire game world. So it's like, how do you know where the bottleneck is? Without a tool, it would be impossible. So like, know your debugger, know how to look at a crash dump, know how to like use a performance profiler, like see where, like it's all about measuring. And in fact, even with like game mechanics, like don't assume that like it's going to be fun or that people are going to be able to pick it up right away. That's part of the reason it was so important for us to go out and really like put it in front of players and see like, okay, well, I thought this was obvious, but do they think it's obvious? And to be honest, the first playtest we ever did, they missed every single important thing. So it's quite the learning experience when you actually sit down and measure it. So, but I'm going to be honest, programming is hard. There is so much that goes into it. Like, I think it's very fun and rewarding, but not all of it is fun and rewarding. Like, think about any video game you've ever played, and it's like, there are so many little, like, minute details on, like, everything, like, from just, like, I don't know, like, all the UI work that you might not think about, or all the different ways you can interact with every item, and all the sound effects, and all the things that go in. Like, some programmer basically had to go in and actually implement that. So it's like, part of being a game developer is truthfully embracing the grind, because it is there. You will have to debug, like, horrible bugs right in the middle of stressful times. We went to multiple conventions. The absolute last thing you want is for there to be a crash and for you to have almost no diagnostics, but I have lived that life. And I can tell you, it's not always fun. Speaking of grindy things, one of the things that programmers tend to find a bit grindy is communicating. So I cannot understate how, or overstate, how important it is to be able to communicate clearly on your team, especially with your game designer. So again, games are very like complex pieces of software. It's like you need to be thinking through a lot of like edge cases, a lot of, different things that you might not think about. And so being able to like really like nail down the vision of the game and, all of the specific mechanics with your game designer is like absolutely critical. When you sit down to implement something, you should have a very good mental model of what it is you're trying to do. I think like in some ways, like it's a bit easier with games in this respect than it is with like web programming, because when I sit down to play a game, I can look at the like game objects or actors that are there, and I can sort of like build a mental model of what it is I'm trying to program. But with web programming, it's a little bit more abstract. It's a little bit more difficult unless you sort of think about it from a UI perspective. When I did web programming, I was a back-end developer, by the way. Patrick's definitely the like front-end, like more artistic type. I am not. But when programming, again, especially with games, don't back yourself into a corner. Your game designer today might say they want it to work this way. I can 100% guarantee 1 month later, they're going to be like, well, why doesn't it work this other way? Like I said I wanted that. And you're going to be like, no, I built the entire system around this assumption. They will change their mind. Do not back yourself into a corner. And one of the like worst ways you can back yourself into the corner is not deciding early on whether the game is going to be multiplayer. Let me tell you, you cannot take a single player game and make it multiplayer. Every single part of your game has to be engineered around it being multiplayer. Because now it's like, it's not just running locally on the client anymore. Like any web programmer knows this, right? It's like, you can't just like directly like write to the database. It's like you've got to do some sort of call from the front end to the server and like back to do all this stuff. Like it's the same with any sort of like multiplayer programming. It is a huge engineering challenge. So decide from the beginning, like, is this going to be a multiplayer game? And it's not even just like the engineering aspect, it's also like the gameplay aspect. Like our game, Human Like, that Patrick mentioned, like we originally wrote it as like a single player game, and we're like, okay, well, let's see if we can bolt some multiplayer on top of it. Like even beyond, like even local multiplayer, like without any like network stuff, like the game mechanics just didn't work. So really think about like what your game is going to be from the beginning. Now, that being said, I also want to say this. Don't get attached to the code you write. This is especially true in game development, where it's like a lot of times you need to like prototype things. Like I've known like several game developers who like kept some kind of suboptimal features in their game because they're like, hey, I wrote this, it's cool. And then they didn't want to throw it away. But to be honest, like a big part of making a good game is to have a cohesive vision. And that means sometimes things need to get cut to preserve that vision. So as I was saying, like prototype your ideas quickly. Games do not start out looking amazing from the get-go. Here's like an image of what our game looked like within like, yeah, this was like 2 months in. Like these are all stock assets. We had our artists just like knock together this horrible not to scale level. And just gray boxes, I did this horrible state machine programming for the wolf just to get something out there. It's much easier to be creative when you have something that you can actually play with. So I always advocate for just get your ideas out there. Just try it. See how the like game mechanic feels. Because like things may work on paper, but they almost never actually like work in practice without taking it into the like broader context of the game.
My favorite part's the floating sword.
Yeah, I love the floating sword. It's not even snapped to the socket. Like, I like how the dogs jump too, because like, and not only do they jump, but there's no animation when it's played, so they just sort of like spring into the air. But because like games are systems that can evolve very quickly, I want to like sort of caution people against over-engineering the code that they write. I'll admit it, I like to over-engineer things. I like to be the architect, and I like to make like cool systems that like scale really well. But to be honest, what's the point of putting in all that effort into that mechanic if it might just get cut? So I'd say like normally do the do it quick and dirty to start out with. If it turns out to be something that's like worth pursuing further, you can go back and make it into like a better system. But once you like have those things that you think are like really core to your game, try and make systems like built around your code that make it easy to extend. So in the Grip of Madness, we have like several instances of this. So for instance, like a player has sanity. And so as their sanity drops, they start experiencing hallucinations. We call them madness effects. So these are things like seeing players like appear as like monsters, or like seeing items that are like needed for the ritual, but they're not actually the real item. And when you like put them on the pentagram, they just like, you know, turn back into their actual item. So things like that. So it's like, or like crafting. We have a crafting system that is part of the rituals. So like you're basically like fighting these monsters, you don't know who the traitor is, and you're trying to complete these rituals by like going around the map, finding different like things and like crafting them and, you know, bringing the final item, like the pentagram. And it's like, we know that we're gonna need a lot of crafting recipes. We know we're gonna need a lot of madness effects. You know, we know it needs to be easy to add new types of items to the game. So we made sure that like once we saw that these mechanics worked, we sat down and we tried to make it very easy for either us to extend or for even our artists to extend. Because like when you're working on a team, like in game development, not everyone is going to be technical. Like your artist probably is not going to be going in and, you know, debugging something for you. And sometimes even asking them to just configure like a JSON file might be too much. So it's like, it's good to consider like, what are who are the different members of your team? Whose job is it going to be to do that thing? How can you make it easy for them to do that? And as like a last point, I'd say like as developers, I know we tend to think of ourselves as technical a lot, but I think it's really important that we're part of the creative process. That procedural generation system, that was actually my idea. And there have been a lot of things like that where it's like, I saw an opportunity in what we were doing because I'm in the trenches, I'm working with the code every day. It's like, when you're a programmer, you can see things that are possible that, you know, a game designer might miss. And so I think it's really important to like use your voice and to really communicate with your team like about any like cool ideas you have. Because like there's all sorts of different ways you can contribute aside from just being able to technically execute on something. So I'm going to hand it back to Patrick.
This is the last slide, don't worry. I just wanted to say thank you so much, guys. If you are interested in the Grip of Madness, you can check out the website, gripofmadness.com. From there, you can visit our Steam page and wishlist the game and give it a check out by playing the demo with some of your friends. You can also join our Discord as well, where we run like, I think it's bi-weekly community nights. I think our next one is next Monday. So you're welcome to join that. We'll be playing and talking about the game there and about our, you know, a bit deeper into our process as well. And also, if you're interested, we've got, like I said, we've got some stickers and some cards back there. Otherwise, we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So it looks like we're doing great on time. So I think what we're going to do is I'd like to invite Clint back up. And I think we're going to, if anyone has questions, I think we're going to try to do some Q&A.
So I have a question for Clint. I wanted to ask, like, if somebody wants to follow into like a similar like career path that you took, where would you start? Like, how did you get into this career path? Where did you learn this kind of stuff? And I was wondering like how did you get into it basically?
Yeah, I think to give you a little bit more of my background, when I was young, I loved games. Like I said, I was a pirate. I was a huge pirate, stole a bunch of games. I just did everything I could to kind of get into them. And I parlayed that into trying to look for opportunities to work in that kind of tooling, right? So I worked got a job at a startup working in fraud and risk. I never thought I would get to games, but even in that, when we had games coming in, some of the smartest fraud rings I've seen, were either like huge high financial fraud where it'd be like 100,000 plus, or gamers. Like gamers attack stuff to a degree that, you know, rarely anyone does. So like $8 transactions, you know, in the fraud market. But how I got into it was really just applied at game companies. So I took that experience from 2checkout.com is where I worked. And then, you know, at the time I talked my wife into allowing me to go after my dream. I was like, you know, I want to go to a new company. You know, it might even be a step back. Like from a career perspective, decided like, hey, I'll take what I've done, even take a step back. And I applied to Riot and several other game companies.
To continue that train of thought, how would you describe your time working at Epic? I know Epic and other large game companies sometimes get a bad rap because they really push their game programmers mostly, but how would you describe your experience?
So I worked at Riot Games, but no, it's good. But honestly, I definitely seen there definitely is, you know, the grind is just part of games. Like, it is not always the most fun job, and I would say you really have to love games and have to love doing it. You know, an average day of work was like 10-hour day, you know? I mean, that's just, that is what it is. And partly too, because gamers are some of the most notorious at being demanding, right? We are a very hard consumer group. As a gamer myself, I know how pissed I get when balance isn't right or my game's not up or things like that, you know? And it's a very, very competitive market too, right? You can go play another game. There's tons of other ways to spend your time in gaming these days. So that part, I think that also leads it to being a very, very, grindy type culture. But I would say my experience was, I loved it. I loved being able to work to serve a player. You know, like I said, my experience before gaming was more on the financial side. You know, making some bank, some money was not as self-rewarding as being able to work for players.
Coming from someone who has never once looked at any kind of game software and doesn't understand it at all, you talk about how the game's on Unreal, but you also write a ton of C++. Like, where's the line there? What are you actually writing, and what do you get out of the box? I'm really curious on that.
So, like I said, we're using Unreal Engine 4. So basically that comes with 2 options for doing development. I do like 99% of all of the code in C++, but there is also a visual scripting language called Blueprint. So that allows you to sort of like visually like wire up nodes and other things like that. If you've ever seen like Scratch or anything like that, it's sort of like that. I'd say that, you know, if you wanted to start out with Unreal, like Blueprint is a very like legitimate way to start with that. I would not want to write anything like complicated in it. We mostly use it for like sort of like wiring up like UI events and things like that. But I would say like if you were going to learn like the basics of game programming first, I might actually recommend starting out with like Unity. I think Unity is a lot more beginner friendly for sort of approaching, especially if you've done any sort of like C# development, because that uses C#. But like it also really depends on what sort of type of game you want to build. Like Unity is really geared towards doing things more like mobile development and stuff like that. Unreal is obviously geared towards doing like first-person shooters. So if you want to like learn how to make a shooter, I would definitely say go with Unreal.
There we go.
I had a very similar question, but to lead with that, when you mock something up, do you start with what Unreal has for you, and then just make it yours over time? Like, have you ever messed with shader stuff to overwrite the Unreal stuff?
Yes, of course. So I would say that like in the very early stages of like making a game, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to make everything custom. A lot of stuff starts out as sort of placeholders, you know, like like Unreal comes with a bunch of like default assets, and there's also a lot of things sort of available on the Epic Games Store for free. So like in the early stages, it just makes a lot of sense to use placeholders. When like you're a bit like deeper into the game and you want to start, you know, actually getting your own art in, we still always start with a placeholder. So we have an artist on the team, but the truth is that like producing art is one of the most expensive and time-consuming like parts of development. So it's like we don't really want to like start doing the art until we're like sure that this is something that's going to make it into the final game. So it's like it's basically like everything starts out as just placeholder, and it moves towards being like more custom the further along in development you get, if that makes sense.
Anyone else have a question? Oh, we have so many questions. That's great.
I'll go sure. So Michael,
It's for them.
Okay.
It's not for you.
with your procedural map generation, is that based on the Perlin noise algorithm or some other mechanisms?
So Perlin noise is typically used for like terrain type generations. That's really good for, you know, if you're gonna like generate like a mountain, or like Perlin works is like the 3D equivalent. So that's the like algorithm that Minecraft uses. So the issue with those algorithms is they're really good at generating sort of like natural scenes. They're not really so good at generating like indoor scenes. So Unreal does not have anything to help you in this respect. So we wound up creating our like own system that basically allows us to do a combination of like having like pre-built rooms that have a lot of like.
We can hear you though.
Make sure it's running.
Hello? Oh, sorry guys. Yeah, so anyway, so with procedural generation, the issue is like there's this trade-off between you want it to feel random, but you don't want it to feel so random that it's bad. So it's like you want it to be random enough, but still maintain artistic control. So to do that, we wound up creating like our own custom solution. So like it can like, you know, generate different walls and floors and all sorts of things like that. But we also have like some like pre-built areas where there are different things that we call level segment features that get turned on or off. So for instance, like if you have a kitchen and you have to do a crafting ritual that involves like cooking, like we might want to have different heat sources that in the final generated map might be there, but we might not always want them to be able to use the stove. So we have the ability to like, okay, turn the stove off. You have to like use like the fireplace that's on the remote part of the map. So it's like our procedural generation system, it works at several different levels. It's like the overall layout of the level, how the individual rooms are customized, and it hooks into like our ritual system to control where items are placed and like, you know, what sort of rituals need to be completed. Does that make sense?
So if you're on a game engine like Unity and you're using a software as a service component like Photon networking, is there a part of your services that works with an external SaaS like Photon as a networking component, or do you still have to like bolt on a lot of behavioral like sort of detection?
Yeah, it all comes down to like the risk exposure that the game has, right? I think it's pretty fundamental that it's always easier to destroy than it is to create, right? And so it comes down to what's that risk exposure for that game is really, I think, the best answer to like, if you need the solution, like deciding like, okay, what's the right type of solution here? And that would just be trying to understand your players, and you know, in a game where it's going to be more PvE or team oriented, or even a single player game, cheating really doesn't matter, right? Skyrim, nobody cares, right? But if it's a competitive game and that's, you know, the value and that's what people are fighting for, that's when you got to bolt on some extra stuff.
Right. Thank you.
Who else?
Hello, this is for Michael and Patrick. So you said you know your market. So the groups of madness come from an idea to pitch the market. You see the market and they have your idea.
So when it came to it, when we first were coming up with the idea, it was like we initially knew that we were seeing a resurgence in kind of cooperative experiences. Players were wanting to play with their friends. People were separated by the pandemic. So really just observing like the market conditions there.
Oh, can I add another point to that?
Sure.
Also, our board game designer, or our game designer who is also a board game designer, Ben, he has a background in social deduction games. So it made sense to, like he actually like published one like a couple months before we started development. So it made sense that it's like, there weren't that many social deduction games. There's a lot of shooters, but not many like first-person shooters that have those sort of betrayal elements. So it's like, it's kind of both. It's like, this was sort of an area that our team was like familiar with, so we kind of knew to be looking at the market to see whether or not it made sense to do that.
Who's next? This is for Clint. I've made a couple cheats myself, mostly with CSGO, because I used to be big into that. So I'm pretty well versed in how their anti-cheat works. So I'm just wondering, with like League and Vanguard, if someone finds a new way of cheating your game or exploiting it, how do you combat that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's going to happen, right? Like the idea behind Vanguard and why we built it was really we wanted to speed up the process of adapting to whatever the new type of attack was, right? So in CSGO, right, we've seen cheats that were all user mode to start with, like, oh, I can just write some cheats. Then, and VAC not being kernel, everyone goes to the kernel now, so it's much, much easier. So in the kernel, you can get around any user mode detection because the kernel runs first, right? So, hey, if I move my cheats to the kernel, then no worries, right? Well, now you see hypervisor cheats and also direct memory access, right? So people are actually hooking cards up into their machines. I mean, it's kind of a little crazy that it's gotten to this point where it's this competitive. There's also, I've seen a lot of webcam cheats where people will either use Arduinos or things like that to completely cheat outside of the system as much as they possibly can. So to answer your question about what's different about Vanguard, specifically, we just wanted to build a system that tried to enforce as much control as possible for that player. So one of the things we did with it was a driver on boot. So, other traditional anti-cheats only load their driver when the game's running. With Vanguard, we loaded it at startup, which was not very, there's obviously privacy concerns there. Players were really angry at us. Riot happens to also be owned by a Chinese company, so everyone said Chinese spyware, even though we wrote it, so we know it wasn't. But really, what we used it for was just ensuring state integrity more than anything. So like we had no network connection or anything to it. But the overarching point is that you don't always get to define the where the war goes. Really, the attacker does, and if your player or your, in this case, your customer and player are okay with you giving that access of control, for a better experience, then it works. Wouldn't make sense to do that on like League of Legends still does not have a kernel driver on it at all because of the more server authoritative game. It just doesn't need one.
I helped you when I was so comfortable. So for Michael and Patrick, I was wondering, are you guys planning on having like controller support like with Steam Deck or anything like that, or?
Yes.
Is that like difficult to build into the game, or how does that like work?
Yes.
Give me that.
I was going to answer and seriously, good gosh. Yes, in all seriousness, there is a lot of factors, though, to consider specifically for an FPS. So take, for example, our prior game, Human Like. It's just, we just directly map to a controller and, Bob's your uncle, you're done. But it's like, there's a lot more that goes into specifically like camera control, aim assist, bullet magnetism, a lot of more elements that kind of come into a game like an FPS, like the Grip of Madness is. So there's a lot of like, kind of more fine tuning that you have to do to make sure that it's a good experience for the player. So yeah. Did you want to add anything?
I do want to add. So another thing to think about is like your control scheme needs to be like aside from just like aiming, it needs to be designed to work across like several different systems. Like if we were gonna make like, like the Grip of Madness, it's gonna work on like PC and everything, and we just have like 30 key binds, and we've designed the entire like control system to like needing all those keys. Like it's not gonna work very well just trying to like translate that like over to a controller. So like even though we haven't done any ports right now, we're always trying to think about like what that interaction would look like on these other systems, so that we're not going to have to rethink like all of like the gameplay and UI and everything.
I had a question for Clint. Related to his over there, what's the current status of like bug bounty programs, or am I better off selling my new cheat to China?
Well, I think they're getting better, but I would argue there's still a lot of work to be done there. I think bug bounties in general, companies don't pay out enough for them for the amount of value that they really do create. I mean, this is a security guy talking about bug bounties being marred, so maybe it's a little bit. But so at Riot, we did do a bug bounty program for cheating. I don't think we were the first, but we were certainly in the minority with that. We got really great information from the community. And matter of fact, most of the team that I hired were ex-cheaters to begin with at Riot, right? Like you have to understand, what you're fighting, back to the first point of my strategy. So I don't even though it's an adversarial thing in a way, we never really saw the cheaters completely as enemies. They were also informants. They were incredibly helpful, that kind of thing.
I have a quick question. You alluded to a lot of the people you hired were former cheaters. We have a lot of students and people who have just graduated. Is that the best way? Like, do you just gotta hack some games and then you get hired, or is there something else? Do you need certifications?
I mean, I do think engineering is one of the fields where talent matters, right? And just having experience. Having experience in the technology stack that you're going to be working with, and just, grinding on it, understanding it, it's a provable skill, right? I wouldn't recommend necessarily to go into cheating to get into every side of engineering, but if you want to be into anti-cheat, absolutely, you should be writing cheats, right? Just don't sell them, and don't attack live service games where people get real angry.
Oh, both of us.
Yeah, so how much of a concern is security for you guys? How much does Steam handle for you? And are you worried about having a demo up this long before launching the game?
Do you want to take?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, take it.
So that's a good question. So there's a couple factors here. So the first is that the Grip of Madness is a cooperative game. So there's, in a lot of ways, like less incentive to cheat. We will wind up having sort of like a progression type system with like unlockables and things. So we'll definitely like want to have like some anti-cheat, but I think it's less of a concern. Perhaps more of a concern is things like DDoS attacks. So for that, we have like sort of two mitigation strategies that we're doing. One is that all of our network traffic gets sent over the Steam backbone. So the interesting thing is Steam has its own backbone. It has amazing latency, by the way. We did this like network test where we were in the same building on two different networks, and somehow the latency sending it like just between the two networks was like more than it was like sending the packet like to like the other one's house over the Steam backbone.
Yeah, I think the ping time was 67 seconds over, or 67 milliseconds over LAN, and over the Steam backbone it went down to like 30.
I thought it was like 30 over. I would be concerned if it was 67 over the LAN.
It was
but
pretty high.
Yeah, it was pretty
our
high.
Office Wi-Fi is pretty garbage.
It's pretty garbage. I can concur with that. But basically, so their backbone is like amazing. Like, it used to be that Steam games could get like, flooded with sort of like DDoS packets, but that's actually been like largely mitigated just because it can handle the sheer amount of bandwidth. So does that answer your question?
And also, I do believe the Steamworks API itself actually does provide some level of DDoS protection in itself.
Right. Also, like the game content is like encrypted and things like that. But it's like that's not going to stop someone who like really knows what they're doing. It's more so you just want to make it as painful as possible.
I think we have enough time for just a couple more questions. Anyone else?
I think the gentleman up in the front here.
You sure?
I guess this could be for both of you, but what do you think is the best way to monetize your game? I know yours is pre-release, but how do you plan on monetizing it when that time comes?
So currently right now, we are planning on going down it's called the premium model, in which it's what most indie games do, in which you just set a price and that's what it's sold at, just like you would like buy a retail game. The other option that we are also considering is doing something along the lines of like an Xbox Games Pass kind of service, where it's, you get all of the content like upfront and you just pay that flat subscription fee for that service as a whole, and you just get unlimited access to the game. So it's really just kind of figuring out, what is our target demographic going to be primarily buying? Are they going to be on a Game Pass-like service, which we personally believe is the case. It's actually where we want to go to with the game, but we're also considering that premium model as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, and to just also throw this out there, I am morally opposed to pay-to-play. So no microtransactions to get better skills.
I saw you guys showed a spreadsheet, and it was hard to see from back here, but it looked like maybe $45,000 a month for the budget. And I was just wondering, is that all from pre-sales, or you got self-funding? You have some angel investors to help you out?
So depending on, we're seeking investment right now. And that's usually done through a project-driven approach, typically in the games industry. So you're typically seeking out a publisher. There is also a venture capital option, but they typically are more so interested in like free-to-play games, games that can kind of scale really fast. So it's possible, but like it's less common. But for us, we're going kind of more with a project-driven approach to seeking that funding. So initially it would be initial investment, and then hopefully we would be supplanting that with sales of the game like after the fact, after the recoup period.
One last question. So this question is for Clint. There's a lot of news about like this next generation of hacking and cheating in games. I wanted to take your input on it. But basically, if I'm not wrong, most of the cheating nowadays is reading the game's memory, like you were saying, goes into the kernel, all that. But what I've seen a lot is there's a lot of new AI kind of cheats where it's external, not injected. And I think you talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to see if that's is that a big concern for you?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Sorry. I do think there's going to be some real technical challenges in the future. I think today, it's still a market where people are selling cheats, right? So if you have to go buy a piece of hardware or you have to go do something, really that is not going to be a very lucrative business. I mean, it's tough, right? Like people do sell direct memory access cards and, kits and things like that. For a couple $1,000 you can get them. But what we still see is really just traditional attacks on Windows and software cheats. But let me tell you, on the the machine learning side, I still think we're a ways off on that, even having a good detection vectors. So we've spent, or when I was at Riot, we spent lots of money and many efforts trying to come up with good machine learning for detection. But that's a very difficult situation to be in because you need a very high confidence rate in order to action a cheater. And so your traditional systems of being able to scan what's running on the machine, what the state is in, what the player is doing, that kind of stuff, is much cheaper and has a faster, more confident, it takes a lot of data to train models. So externally, I can only imagine, like I see some of these projects where people are creating like, machine learning cheats and things like that. It's just the amount of data to be truly effective, But I do think it's on the roadmap, right? Like I think at some point, someone once said that like even the bot war, what happens when, because we were pushing them, and we got to a point where in ARAM specifically, bots were better than the average player. Matter of fact, they were better than the average rioter, and that's part of the reason why we got rid of them was because we were getting complaints from rioters that they were dealing with bots all the time because they could play the game as effectively, right? And so when we get to that stage, is it a bot that's detecting? Well, you need a bot to detect some type of bot, right? Some type of behavioral detection. But there's still some motivation behind that, right? And in our case, it's it was the money, right? So I think that'll all cheating is kind of a good problem in a way, right? It's a metric of interest in the game too. So yeah, I think it's coming. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're even close to being there yet. Luckily.
We're done. So could we have a hand for our speakers now? That was great. Thank you both. Here, we're going to probably do like a little outro, and then we'll be good to go. So thank you again for coming. This was, I think, the best Q&A session we've ever had at a Code Youngstown event. So thank you to everyone who participated in asking questions. Thank you all for taking the time to answer. This was great. We have one more round of applause. Thank you everyone.